listening to the ESP, the European Skeptics Podcast, an independent weekly show set out to bring you news, interesting topics and interviews with people mostly from Europe, building bridges and breaking down language barriers to show the world how active and awesome the skeptical movement is in the region. This is episode 513. I'm your host, András Pinter, and joining me for the show is my co-host, Pontus Böckman. See ya!
Hejsan, András. Happy Epiphany Day.
Happy Epiphany Day, yes.
Yes.
Epiphania.
Epiphania. Is it a bank holiday in Hungary?
No, it's not.
It is in Sweden, for some reason. We're not Catholics. We are not, I don't know what we are. Well, we're atheists mostly, but we do take our bank holidays very seriously anyway. So, for some reason. So on the 6th of January, that's when the three wise guys found Jesus. And we celebrate that. Or we don't. We just don't go to work.
Yeah, but that's like a double thing about Jesus' story, right? Because that's also the date that we celebrate the baptism of Christ as
really?
well.
It was a busy day for him then.
It was a busy day.
They did the honors while they were there. Well, give him a name as well. Why don't we give them some myrrh and some gold and some fancy stuff, and then we'll give him a name.
Now, if memory serves, he was already an adult when he was baptized. But
so it's not the same year. Okay, I see.
No.
I see.
No.
So because he was baptized by John the
Baptist. Yeah.
Baptist.
Jean Baptiste.
Jean-Baptiste. Mm-hmm. Yes. All right. Enough of this religious nonsense. How's the weather?
Amazing. I love it. It's snowing like crazy. And we have temperatures around 0 and below. So I really like it. It's really my kind of weather.
We have about 4 to 5 centimeters of snow. It stopped snowing now, but it's 3 to 4 degrees below zero. So it's very... very nice, very calm, especially since it's a bank holiday. People are not up and about as much. But I understand that in some parts of Europe, it's a real problem. The airport in Amsterdam has been heavily hit by snow. And also Paris and France in general, there is some problems traffic-wise and stuff.
Okay, it's a good thing I'm not traveling until next Monday.
Okay.
Yeah. However, we do have a forecast saying an expected 40 centimeters of snow in some parts of Hungary in the next couple of days.
40. Oh.
40.
That is a lot.
Yeah, so if someone lives in the south of Hungary, they might be able to see that. We haven't seen that much snow for many, many years. So
okay, all right. Okay.
So much for climate change, right?
Exactly. This is just a blip.
Yeah.
Speaking of storms, András, we have to mention, even though it's happening in another continent, Trump's attack on Venezuela a little bit, because that's the big thing that everybody's talking about right now.
I don't even know what to say about that.
Yeah, it's so crazy. You don't know where to start. But there's some things people don't mention, I think. Not enough, anyway. Mm-hmm. And I'll get to that. But also, first of all, just go through the basics. Maduro is a bastard, right? He is a corrupt dictator, and he has destroyed Venezuela for many years. I've met people from Venezuela, people who have had to flee the country. It's so corrupt. Their parents were forced to sell their houses to officials for the old currency rate, which amounts so they got maybe $5,000
for a house,
for a full house, and then these officials, they can sell it at market price, of course. So total naked corruption, everything.
I don't think anyone denies that. That Maduro is a bastard.
No, that's not exactly. Everybody agrees on this, but it's still clearly illegal according to international law and also to U.S. law. I'm not a legal expert, but I listen to some podcasts. I can recommend Opening Arguments. Thomas Smith. Well, he's not a lawyer, but he has lawyers on the show, and they are quite clear. This is not legal. He's a gangster, Trump is. And then he talks about the drugs, of course. But that's the pretense only, because then it's all about the oil. Everybody agrees on that.
And then he doesn't even try to make it look like it's not. Because he specifically said it out loud that we're going to put the oil companies, US oil companies on the ground. And so he's doing it like outright straightforward about the oil.
Yeah. But then to one thing that people are not stressing enough.
Yeah.
He has kidnapped the sitting president, whether he was legally there or not, but he's kidnapped that guy. But he's doing nothing for democracy. Not at all. He's ignoring the opposition. Well, he says he's going to run the country, or they are going to run the country. But he's expecting the vice president to do it. So all the corruption is still there. Because the whole organization is still there.
The vice president is still there.
So Trump doesn't care about this. But the more, even worse thing is, what does this mean for international law and precedent? Yeah. And of course, it's a lot of talk about Greenland now. What if America makes true on their promise to just snatch Greenland? Then you have a civil war, if you can call it that, within NATO. How he's out of his mind.
Yeah, just to mention for those who are not familiar with that, Greenland jurisdictionally belongs to Denmark.
Yeah.
It has its autonomous government, but it is officially part of
Denmark and therefore part of NATO. So we have, I don't know. This is crazy town level of stuff. And of course, Putin is now talking about maybe he can abduct Zelensky or kidnapping Merz.
But don't give him ideas.
No, but that's not my idea. That was somebody in Russia who said that. They're already thinking about that.
And now he says that dictators all around the world should be worried. But I don't think the most dangerous dictators have anything to worry about.
No.
Xi Jinping has nothing to worry about. Putin has nothing to worry about. It might be controversial what I'm saying now, but Netanyahu has nothing to worry about.
That's right.
Yeah.
Or Orban.
Orban has nothing to worry about. He probably does have something to worry about.
Not
because there are upcoming elections, but...
yes, but not because that Trump is going to do anything against him. And neither would Putin. So anyway, this is not a political podcast, but I will argue this is what we're talking about now. This is not even politics. This is just highway robbery. Yeah. And we should probably move on, but it's hard not to talk about it at all because it's such a crazy world we're living in now.
It is indeed. I don't know if I've said this on this podcast, but in conversations I've definitely said it before, that when you look at the history of the First World War and the Second World War, in both instances, the United States was on the side of normalcy, of decency, they were the ones who entered the war because they wanted to stop the aggressors.
Yeah.
And now with them being on God knows which side of the fence, that's just a whole new world order. Well, not order in the normal sense.
Chaos.
It's chaos, yeah.
New world chaos, that's what we're talking about here. And Trump, if you're listening, when the US helped Europe several times in the past, and some other places as well, it was beneficial for America. To be good is actually profitable. So what are you doing? It's not even a good idea for you.
It really boosted the US economy in both instances.
Yes.
And they made themselves impossible to ignore on the global scale. That was what really put them on the world map for good. And now he's just destroying it. Everyone's for their own. This is why I think it's very dangerous what Orban is doing, being the inside opposition within the European Union, because the European Union should be really pulled together instead of being dismantled in a way. Yeah. The only way we can really move forward is if we stick together and we work together in unity, both militarily and economically and culturally. This is our only chance. And unfortunately, what Trump does is a bit of an example to several politicians in Europe as well, and vice versa, unfortunately. So I'm embarrassed to know and to mention even how many times have Trump quoted Orban as the example of a strong man. Should not be the case. Yeah. He's a ridiculous, terrible leader and just an evil person. So you should not follow the example of that.
No.
Okay.
All right.
Enough of that.
Enough.
Let's try to focus on the good things. And I do have a good thing coming.
Okay,
because this week in Skeptical History, or TWISH, is the part of the show that is focusing on something happening in the history of science or skepticism. And I know that I probably come across as obsessed with Galileo Galilei, but I don't mind. I don't care.
There are worse things to be obsessed with.
Yeah, and one of the most transformative nights in the history of science can be linked to his name, and it took place on the 7th of January, 1610. That was a cold winter night in northern Italy, so he was in Padua. And back then, he was a professor of mathematics and geometry and astronomy at the University of Padua. He pointed like a little crude homemade telescope of his at the planet Jupiter, and he quietly began dismantling a worldview that had dominated Western thought for nearly 2,000 years. What he saw looked simple enough. 3 tiny points of light lined up neatly beside Jupiter. They were faint, but unmistakably there, and Galileo assumed at first that they were distant fixed stars. That assumption would last exactly 1 night. Now, to be able to appreciate why this whole thing matters, and I'm going to continue with the story of how he discovered them, but to appreciate this all, we need to remember the intellectual backdrop of this whole situation. Since antiquity, the universe had been understood through the combined authority of Aristotle and Ptolemy. Earth, according to them, sat immobile at the center of everything, right? Mm-hmm. The moon, the sun, the planets, and the stars all revolved around us in perfect eternal spheres. Well, not so perfect, because as the observations became more and more accurate, it turned out that there's something wrong with that model. And while it really aligned with common sense, with theology, and with centuries of scholarship, it was not merely an astronomical model, it was the cosmos as it was supposed to be. Then came Copernicus. And based on some of the observations of the time, he came up with a new model. And that was the heliocentric model that assumed that instead of the Earth, it was the sun that was in the center of everything, and everything orbited the sun. But the problem was still there, that they could not find out why the movements of the stars and the planet were so weird. And that eventually was the task that Johannes Kepler really solved, the elliptical orbits. And by the way, why he didn't get into trouble for that was because he didn't try to push it as the description of reality. He put it out as a model, as a mathematical model for what could be the case. But Galilei really took it seriously, and he was the kind of person, according to his biographers, who really liked to rub it in everyone's face.
He was a troublemaker, wasn't he?
He was a bit of a troublemaker, and he got into trouble quite often as well, eventually by the Inquisition as well. So he was at the time a professor in Padua, as I mentioned, and he had recently built his own improved telescope, which was based on a telescope coming from the Netherlands. And his first telescope was built in 1609, and he had already made a name for himself. That kind of telescope, which is a refraction telescope, it's still named after him. So it's called a Galilean telescope, even to this day. So the first telescope that he built came with like a 9 times magnification. But by 1610, he could really build a much better telescope. He actually made his own lenses for the telescopes, which is phenomenal. And he made quite a bit of a fortune selling these telescopes as well. So he was not the first one to build them, but he was the one perfecting them. But also, he was the first one that we know of to have pointed the telescope at the night sky. And with that magnification that he could achieve, he discovered a couple of very interesting things. At first, it was the moon. And he discovered shadows on the moon and the craters of the moon and all that. And that was phenomenal. He made elaborate drawings of those, which was fantastic. But then, on the 7th of January 1610, with the telescope capable of about 20 times magnification, and really overcoming some of the problems that the telescopes were plagued with, like glare and color distortions and everything, he managed to find a way to keep the aperture, the opening of the telescope, small enough so that the image could be improved. With this telescope, and the Jupiter conveniently being near opposition, being very bright, very close to Earth, appearing much bigger, he looked up and saw those 3 tiny points of light. And they were just lining up beside Jupiter, and he thought at first that they were distant stars. But on the 8th of January, he looked again, and the 3 stars were still there, but they had moved. Which was not that surprising, because according to every accepted astronomical model, Jupiter itself should have shifted relative to the background stars, but the direction of the shift was different. Instead of the retrograde direction that it should have gone to, it went the opposite way relative to these 3 points. They now appeared on the opposite side of the planet, closer together than before. So it turned out that they were not fixed stars, but Galileo didn't dismiss this. He didn't rationalize it away, coming up with some weird theory. He recognized it as an anomaly, and he kept on observing. Night after night, he returned to Jupiter. Well, he was lucky enough to have clear skies, and the lights never strayed far from the planet. They changed position relative to Jupiter and to each other, but they moved with it. On January the 10th, one of them vanished. It was likely hidden behind the planet. And on January the 13th, a 4th appeared. By January the 15th, Galileo had reached an inescapable conclusion. These were not stars at all. They were bodies orbiting Jupiter. And they were really lining up. And if you, today, with a small telescope, with a binocular or anything, if you look up and see Jupiter, you will see the same thing. Probably the sight that you have will be much better than what Galileo experienced because of better optics than we have today.
You don't have to build your own telescope anymore.
Yeah, exactly. And lens making is not as crude as it used to be back then. So for the first time in recorded history, humanity, or one of the humans, had seen moons orbiting a planet other than Earth. That was huge. And Galileo published his findings just 2 months later in Sidereus Nuncius, the Starry Messenger. He initially named the objects the Medicean stars, after his patrons, the Medici.
Go where the money goes.
Yeah, go with the money, where the money goes, of course. Though today we know them as Io, Europa, Ganymede, and Callisto, but the 4 of them are called the Galilean moons. In honor of him, of course. And there are charts explaining that even today, some star charts have figures showing the movement of the different Galilean moons. And if you follow them on a time scale, they will basically show a sine wave. So one of the strongest arguments against Copernicus had just collapsed, actually. Aristotelian cosmology insisted there could only be one true center of motion in the universe. If Earth moved, critics argued, how could the moon possibly stay with it? Multiple centers of motion were considered absurd. But then Galileo showed that Jupiter, clearly moving across the sky, had 4 moons that stayed with it anyway. So even if the Earth was considered the center of the universe, there was another celestial object that was the center of its own system. That's really huge. But that still didn't prove heliocentrism outright. That's very important to mention. Because in principle, the geocentric models could absorb almost anything by adding enough epicycles. The epicycles were the things that were on the cycles of the different celestial objects.
Cycles around.
Cycles on cycles on cycles.
Yeah.
And after a while, there were so many of them that it was impossible to calculate. Plus, it still didn't account for the actual observations. So it was important to get rid of later on. But Galileo's observation did far more devastating blow to this, because it demonstrated that Aristotle's foundational assumptions about the structure of the cosmos were completely wrong. And Earth was no longer unique if there was another system with something circling another object. The heavens were no longer simple, and authority was no longer enough. So equally important is how Galileo reached his conclusion. He observed systematically. He recorded dates, times, positions over the following weeks. He made dozens of observations, missing only nights lost to cloud cover, which happens a lot with astronomy. This wasn't casual stargazing. It was disciplined, reproducible science. And that mattered when the claims were challenged. And in 1614, a German astronomer named Simon Marius claimed he had discovered Jupiter's moons first. Galileo responded bluntly, and, as it turns out, correctly. Marius lacked systematic records. His tables were inaccurate. His publication came years later, so historians have since confirmed that Galileo's documentation was decisive, that he was the actual discoverer of these objects. The priority dispute was settled not by reputation, but by the analysis of the evidence. And when Sideraus Nuncius, the publication, The Starry Messenger, spread across Europe, astronomers pointed their telescopes skyward. Many had doubted Galileo's earlier claims about lunar mountains or the Milky Way being made of stars and other objects. Now, they now saw the same moons for themselves and our own moon in much more detail, and belief was no longer required. Verification was possible. This is the real legacy of Jupiter's moon. And I think these 4 small points of light were enough to show that the 2,000-year-old cosmic edifice was built on sand. So basically, it's a cool observation. I mean, it's a cool point in the history of science. And I'd like to point out that they are still in the center of scientific inquiry, because the first man-made objects that reached or approached some of Jupiter's moons were launched in 1973 and 74, the Pioneer 10 and 11, then Voyager 1 and 2, the 2 furthest man-made objects that have ever been put out there. They had a bit of a flyby as well, and the Galileo spacecraft that had an orbiter mission to Jupiter, and it really brought clear images and measurements. One of the most interesting, to me at least, is the strong evidence of a subsurface saltwater ocean on Europa, one of the 4 moons, because that is one of the contenders when it comes to possible life elsewhere in the solar system. And there are now 2 current missions that are, 3 actually. Juno, which is a NASA mission, and JUICE, the Jupiter Icy Moons Explorer, which was launched on April 2023, and it will reach the Jovial system in July 2031, and Europa Clipper, which will arrive there in 2030. So those are aiming at identifying some of the features and are analyzing the icy moon Europa. So that's absolutely fascinating.
Looking forward to covering that when that happens.
Exactly. And I'm very proud to say that JUICE is a project of the European Space Agency, ESA.
Yes.
So that's also very important to mention. So that's an important history point in the history of science, that January the 7th, 1610, when Galileo Galilei first spotted the largest moons of the planet Jupiter, thus changing how we view the solar system and the whole universe. Mm-hmm. Okay, so Galilei rules. But that brings us to the news.
Yeah. So 2 recurring topics that we have come back to over and over again are AI and online health advice. And obviously you can combine the 2, right? So there is some AI content that you cannot avoid, really. Take, for instance, that AI-generated summary they always get these days when you are Googling something. Yeah. Before you get the actual hit, there's a paragraph that you can expand a little bit to read about what you have Googled. And very often I just skip that because I want to go directly to the links that I was searching for. But I don't want to look at that artificially generated text a lot of the time. But sometimes it can be handy, and I guess a lot of people read it. But when it comes to health-related topics, obviously you should be extra careful. The Guardian took a look at the number of these AI texts regarding certain health conditions, and they ran them by health experts to see how accurate they were, or not in certain cases. Google has said that its AI overviews are quote-unquote helpful and reliable. That's how they see it. But the Guardian found that they sometimes served up inaccurate health information and put people at risk or harm. In one case that experts described as really dangerous, Google wrongly advised people with pancreatic cancer to avoid high-fat foods. The experts said that this was the exact opposite of what you should recommend, and it may increase the risk of patients dying from the disease even.
Oh.
Another problematic example was when Google provided bogus information about crucial liver function tests, which could leave people with serious liver disease wrongly thinking that they are healthy when they are actually sick. Searches for answers about women's cancer tests also provided completely wrong, quote-unquote, information, which the experts said could result in people dismissing genuine concerns. So what did Google say about this? Because, of course, The Guardian asked them. A Google spokesperson said that many of the health examples that The Guardian had shared with them were, quote-unquote, incomplete screenshots. So they couldn't really assess them, right? Yeah, they tried to avoid it. So they didn't really want to talk about it. They said also that the links went to, quote, well-known, reputable sources and recommend seeking out expert advice, end quote. Yeah, well, if you get wrong advice and then it says, please seek out reputable advice, people won't do that, right? And if you have links there which go to sites with the correct information, then what is the point of the summary? If the summary is wrong, that doesn't help much that the links contain correct information. It's not just Google summaries, and it's not just health topics either. In November last year, The Guardian reported that a study found AI chatbots across the range of a lot of platforms. They gave inaccurate financial advice and also summaries of news stories and health advice. And if it stay on the health topics a little bit, The Guardian got support from their findings from the Eve Appeal Cancer Charity, the Mind Mental Health Charity, the British Liver Trust Organisation, and Pancreatic Cancer UK. So they checked with these experts and to see if it was right. But Google, on the other hand, again, they said that their service is continuously improving. Okay, that's good. They also said, quote, we invest significantly in the quality of AI overviews, particularly for topics like health, and the vast majority provide accurate information, end quote. So basically they're saying, well, we get it right most of the time, and we're working on it getting better. So, but I think in the meanwhile, we should be very cautious about these AI summaries, well, whether it's about health or something else.
Or anything else, yeah.
Yeah.
Unfortunately, there are other things that we need to be careful with, and that is, well, experts or people portrayed as experts spreading nonsense, because they can do that too, not only AI. So, first of all, the thing that I'd like to talk about is not very new, but it's a new article that deals with it. It's in a news outlet that's called Magyar Jelen. Hungarian present is what it translates into.
Present as in now, not a
no, as in a present, as in the past and the future.
So it's not as a gift present. Okay,
not as a gift, and they were not very gifted when it comes to journalism. But the problem is that they are well known for spreading a kind of nonsense, especially when it comes to anti-vaccination sentiment. And now they seem to have found something that they can use as an argument against vaccinations. And that is a university course at the University of Pécs, which was where I attended university as well. And it was at the Faculty of Pharmaceutics that in the school year 2024-2025, at the spring semester, there was a course that was called Gene Therapy, and it was offered by a visiting professor from the University of Debrecen, and he goes by the name Géza Sáfrány. He's a very distinguished professor in radiology, but not necessarily radiobiology, and he's very highly credentialed, but he's not an expert in vaccinations and not an expert in the workings of DNA, RNA, genetics in general. So I have no idea why he was given the task of offering that course at the university in the first place. But the problem is that in his course, he categorized mRNA COVID-19 vaccines as gene therapy.
Oh, yeah.
Which is terribly, terribly wrong, misleading, and it should not be portrayed as such, because that gives the wrong idea. And they ran with it. So Magyar Jelen decided that this brings up whole new issues, because then the ombudsman should be contacted regarding that it was not controlled, the vaccination campaign was not controlled by the authorities as a gene therapeutic intervention.
Which is correct, because it's not.
Because it's not. And yet, this professor deals with it as such. Well, I have to mention, just as a side note, that he didn't even know when you see the description of the course. Instead of SARS-CoV-2, he says COVID-SARS-2. That's just a small mistake, but that gives you an idea of how well he knows the whole issue, right? That is just ridiculous. So, no, it's not gene therapy. Let's just clear up what causes the confusion. When we call an mRNA vaccine gene therapy, it's scientifically problematic because gene therapy has a completely different goal. Gene therapy is designed to treat a disease by permanently repairing, replacing, or deactivating a faulty gene in your body. So it has a permanent effect. It actually alters your DNA. Vaccines are designed to prevent infectious diseases by training the immune system, and no DNA interaction takes place there. The mRNA in the vaccines is like a temporary post-it note with instructions for your cells how to produce that particular protein. It enters the outer part of the cell, the cytoplasm, tells the cell to make a harmless spike protein, and is then quickly destroyed by the body. It does not enter the nucleus where your DNA is stored, and it cannot integrate into your genome.
Even I knew that. I could have given this course.
Exactly, and he's a professor, and as far as I know, so I looked him up. So as far as I know, in his own field, he's considered very highly as an expert. But why he gave lectures on something that he's not an expert in is just beyond my comprehension. So when it comes to real gene therapy, it aims for long-lasting or permanent changes to your biology, so it's completely different. And the mRNA vaccine components are gone within days. And that's not just a theory, as some people would claim. This is scientifically proven to be the case. The danger here isn't necessarily that Dr. Schafrein believes the conspiracy theories himself, because in highly technical fields, researchers sometimes group mRNA vaccines under nucleic acid therapeutics or genetic medicine simply because they use genetic code, which RNA sequences are, as a delivery vehicle. It's not altering DNA.
Yeah.
But in a classroom setting, and especially in the current climate, using the label gene therapy without massive qualifiers is completely irresponsible. It conflates a delivery mechanism with a clinical intervention that people tend to fear. So it's a no. And it causes more damage than anything else, because now, as Magyar Jelen does it, they can quote an expert or someone that could be portrayed as an expert, even though he's not an expert on mRNA vaccines. Oh. So I'm really concerned with this, and this is just yet another example of how you can actually add fuel to the flame, and it should not be the case.
Yeah, right. Speaking of harmful things, this next item comes to us from listener Susanne. Mm-hmm. We all know Susanne, right? This is Susanne Gerbig.
Oh,
hello, Susanne.
Okay.
Yeah,
hello,
fairy godmother of this podcast, and of course, very well known for guerrilla skepticism on Wikipedia. But as many also know, Susanne also runs a project and a YouTube channel called Psychics Explained, where she investigates and exposes self-proclaimed so-called psychics, people who claim to be able not only to talk to the dead, because that's easy, but also to get replies, which is much harder. I understand. Very often these people arrange big events with hundreds of people in the audience, and then they do readings, quote unquote, where they seem to know things about people in the audience, and then they proceed to convey messages from the other side. Very spooky stuff. You know, grandma says hello and she has forgiven you, things like that. Silly stuff, unless you really believe it, when it can become very scary and very emotional and very harmful. I think it was Mark Edward who coined the term grief vampires, which is what Susanne still calls them, a very fitting name. Mm-hmm. Normally these grief vampires use cold reading to give the appearance that they know things that they cannot possibly really know. So cold reading, I think people know what that is, but it's when you ask very open-ended questions, which the targets, as you call them, the people who are being read, then confirms, and then you build on that. I see the letter M. Does that mean anything to you? Blah, blah, blah. And then always somebody knows an Aunt Mary, and then it becomes a hit, sort of. Can be very convincing if you don't know what it is and you don't recognize it. So in any case, Susan is based in the US, but she also monitors what's going on in the rest of the world as much as she can. And her tip to us is about a fairly new player in this racket, a UK-based guy that calls himself, quote, Psychic Medium Dean. And Susan this week posted an article about him in the Skeptical Inquirer, which we will link to. But instead of cold reading, this psychic medium Dean appears to use hot reading, which is when you cheat for real. Cold reading you can actually do by mistake. If you don't know what you're doing, you can almost at least think that you're doing it. But hot reading is something different. This is when you cheat for real. You look up details about your target in advance.
That's Peter Popov style. Actually.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah. Nowadays you can do it. Peter Popov had to do it very manually. They wrote down things, and then he heard his wife talking about it in an earpiece.
Technically speaking, what they did back then was amazing. I mean, I think that was very smart.
Yes.
Yeah, but go ahead.
But very dishonest, of course. Nowadays it's much more easy because you have social media. You can simply Google people as well. Among other things, Susan makes a convincing argument for this hot reading, based on how Psychic Medium Dean makes sure that his audience have to buy the tickets directly from him, doesn't use any service or so, contact me directly, and how everybody must state their given names in advance. And together with bank details, if you get a bank transfer to your account, you very often see who's sending the money. Or even also PayPal, that's the same thing. You can see who it's coming from. So it's not hard at all to look up people's information in advance. And if you have an audience of a couple of hundred, that may seem like a lot, but you don't have to check them all. Handful is enough. You don't have time to go through everybody anyway. So you select a few, and then you get these incredible hits, and everybody's very, very impressed. So you have the money is lost for the people who's paying for this quote-unquote service. It interferes with the grieving process.
Yes.
Because people get stuck in the past and they can't get over their loss. It's about dead people, right? And also a harm is that it enforces the belief that the supernatural exists and that it's real and that you can talk to the dead, and beliefs in ghosts and things like that, which is not harmless. And in this context here with Psychic Medium Dean, he cannot do this by mistake. He really is cheating intentionally, because hot reading is not something you do by accident. So a big warning is hereby issued to all UK skeptics, because he is now planning his UK tour. He is from the UK and he has a tour planned for 2026. And it would be great if people could get involved and spread a word about this and maybe do something about it, inform people how bogus this is. But you should also be aware that there are other so-called psychics in the UK with similar names. So this one is Psychic Medium Dean. There are other persons with the name Dean who also are performing other psychic. I mean, I'm not saying that what they are doing is the real deal here. But if you want to go after this Psychic Medium Dean, and if you want to Google him, make sure that you get the right guy.
Yeah, thank you very much. And that brings us to the end of the news round, which means that we are moving on to finding out who's been really wrong or really right.
Yes, let's go for a really right award today, because we need it. But as often is the case, we need to start with something bad and then give the positive side on who is combating this, fighting it. And compared to some things, this may seem almost like an innocent problem, but everything matters. Multivitamin pills is something that people buy all the time, right? And when you tell them that they probably don't need it, people reply, well, better safe than sorry, and, what's the harm? A little extra vitamin, just make sure that I have enough of everything. Well, there is a harm, And it's not just the money that you spend on something that you don't need. A Danish professor of nutrition in Copenhagen University in Denmark, she's called Susanne Bügel. She is actively trying to inform the public about this, but it's hard to reach out and you don't get too much attention. So I thought we'd help her a little bit here. So I don't have the numbers for Denmark. This is a Danish professor, but in Sweden, if we go there, because I have those numbers, we have a population about 10 million people, roundabout. The sales of multivitamins is around 350 million euros only in Sweden. So that's a lot of money. It's a big market. And to a large degree, it's financed by people who say that they oppose big pharma because there's so much money in pharmaceuticals. But yeah, there's a lot of money in this multivitamins thing as well. So Susanne Bügel points out the finding from a big American study from 2024, which not only showed that people who eat multivitamins are not healthier, it actually is the other way around as well. This was a good big cohort study with close to 400,000 generally healthy Americans, and they were monitored for 20 years. So it's a big study. And when you see results like this, and you see that the people who are eating these vitamins actually are a little worse off health-wise, then you can say, okay, but maybe they didn't control the study too much. Maybe people who are not feeling well eat more multivitamins to compensate, to try to compensate. And that's why you get the result that you get. But they say that they did control for all that. They adjusted for all confounding factors that they could, like health diet, like income level, exercise level, and other known health conditions. And by design, they tried to focus on people who were healthy, who did not have any underlying health issues. So when adjusting for all of that, the results remain. People who consume a lot of multivitamin pills did worse health-wise. And this is a quote from the study. Quote, daily multivitamin use was not associated with a mortality benefit. In contrast, we found that daily multivitamin use versus non-use was associated with a 4% higher mortality risk. End quote. So that is not a lot, but it is on the wrong side here. You don't want to pay a lot of money for something that makes you worse.
Yeah.
So, and then of course you have the financial harm. Spending all that money on something worthless. So unless you have some sort of health condition, and in that case you should go to your doctor and see, do I need these multivitamins? Don't just take them just in case because you think it's better safe than sorry or something. Susanne Bügel actually says that the negative side effects are likely due to overdosing, and if she could decide, she would make it that multivitamin pills would only be available with prescription and not freely available in stores as they are today.
I'm in full agreement with that. A lot of people think that something that is beneficial in a small dose can only be even more beneficial in a large dose. But that's just not how things work.
No. We have a very good word for that in Swedish, which is hard to translate. It's called lagom. And lagom means just enough.
Ah, okay.
And it's a positive word. When something is lagom, it's just exactly right. And we like that a lot. We are very lagom in Sweden. Not too much, not too little.
Okay. I think I like that.
But anyway, yeah. So actually I have a word of the week in just a second here, but now you've got two for the price of one. So lagom is one word of the week. But let's finish this segment first. For going public and trying her best to inform about the harm with multivitamin pills, Professor Susanne Bügel at Copenhagen University gets today's award for being really right.
Oh, well. Thank you very much for doing that. And thank you, Pontus, for finding that and mentioning it on the show. But as you said earlier, there is a word of the week, which we haven't had for a while. So I can't wait to find out what that. I'm not going to try to pronounce that. So I leave it to you. Okay. So what is it you brought?
Yes, the word of the week is Besserwisser. And, well, you could probably guess what language it is. Besserwisser.
Besserwisser. It sounds German.
It is German. It is German. And it is a word that we use quite a lot in Swedish. We sort of imported it, and it's part of the Swedish language. Can you guess what it means?
Besser is like better, right? And
correct.
Wissenschaft. Is it like a know-it-all?
Yes, exactly what it
really?
is. A besserwisser is a guy who always knows better than the other guy. In an annoying way. Like a skeptic often is. Actually, you know how skeptics can sometimes sound like besserwissers. And I don't think the word is used very much in English. So I think it's a good word that we can introduce and then try to avoid to become. You don't want to be a besserwisser. It's not a good thing. But it's a fun word to say as well, Besserwisser. And Wisser, you said Wissenschaft, that means science in German. But Wissen is also cognate with wise in English.
Okay. Ooh.
So to know things, to be a guy who is a wise guy. Basically, you could translate the Besserwisser with a wise guy in a way.
You know what we should do, Pontus? We should do an etymology podcast.
We sort of do, aren't we? Don't we? So you said a know-it-all, a wise guy. What else did I say? Smart Alec was one translation I got.
A smart ass?
No, smart Alec. Smart
Alec.
Ass would probably work as well. Never mind. But besserwisser, try to avoid being a besserwisser. It's very easy to come across as a besserwisser if you're a skeptic, because you always seem to know what it's going on, or at least you think you do. A good skeptic realizes that he doesn't really know as much as he thinks, perhaps. Should be but careful.
Yeah, hold that thought, because there is a quote coming up that is usually how we end the show. And this week will be no exception.
Good.
So, I'm not sure if Karl Popper was a besserwisser, but he was definitely the author of, for example, The Logic of Scientific Discovery, which is a very important book that I recommend to everyone who identifies as a skeptic. He was an Austrian-British philosopher and, mostly considered as a philosopher of science. He came up with the idea of the necessity of falsification and all that, so his work is very important for all skeptics. We have had a couple of his quotes already on the show, but this has not been featured yet, so here we go. The genuine rationalist does not think that he or anyone else is in possession of the truth. Nor does he think that mere criticism as such helps us achieve new ideas, but he does think that in the sphere of ideas, only critical discussion can help us sort the wheat from the chaff.
Yes, very wise, very wise.
Mm-hmm.
Not a besserwisser, Karl Popper. He was just a wise guy.
He was a wise man. He was an actual wise man. Good for him. Yeah. Mm-hmm. All right. But that really brings us to the end of this week's episode. So thank you very much for all your efforts, Pontus.
Thanks a lot.
Many, many thanks to our listeners as well for tuning in, for your continued attention. Please keep doing so. And until next week, goodbye.
Hej då.
Vislát. This has been your ESP experience. The show is produced and recorded by TheESP.eu. Join us again next time, but until then, please send your feedback and comments to info@TheESP.eu. We would also love to hear your ideas and suggestions regarding topics, and if you have any skeptical news from any European country, we're always eager to hear about them. If you have an upcoming local event or an organization to promote, please don't hesitate to let us know, as we are more than happy to help. All music in the program was written and performed by Keisha J. Gray and George Robb and is used with their permission. Please check out our webpage for show notes and archive material at theesp.eu. Follow us on Blue Sky at theesp.bsky.social. Like us on Facebook or support our work on patreon.com/theesp. And don't forget to spread the word by sharing our content with others.
I I don't know how you can believe.
Pancreatic cancer to avoid high fat foods.
Oh, okay. That makes more sense, yeah.
To avoid high fat foods.
Do you know what I'm referring to?
Well, I can read it in the script, but I wouldn't be able to tell you otherwise. All right.
How I managed to confuse my own self with changing just a small thing at the end, the closing remarks. That's ridiculous. Okay.